Live from Pier 3 in San Francisco, welcome to Bloomberg West, where we cover the global technology and media companies that are reshaping our world. I'm Emily Chang. Our focus is on innovation, technology, and the future of business. Let's get straight to the rundown. As Facebook closes well below its IPO price for the fourth day in a row, lead underwriter Morgan Stanley is facing questions about why the float was so big, and we have details about how the price was set. PayPal expands its push into brick-and-mortar stores, teaming up with the biggest maker of credit card readers to do so. What's behind the new strategy? We'll talk to PayPal President David Marcus. And why are some TV networks moving shows in trouble to Friday nights, one of the lowest rated times of the week? It's part of a plan to put the DVR to work to boost ratings. We will explain. But first, to the lead. You can't quite call it a comeback, but Facebook is slowly paring its losses, gaining for the second day in a row. Shares of the social network closed up 3%, ending the day at more than $33 a share. The company is now down 13% since opening day. But the controversy over who did what wrong and when is only getting more ugly. Bloomberg has learned more about exactly who was on the call when Facebook and the bankers decided to raise the price of the IPO, including Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman and Facebook CFO David Ebersman. Notably not there, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Sources tell Bloomberg Ebersman wanted to maximize gains for Facebook and minimize the stock's first-day pop to just 10%. J.P. Morgan bankers indicated there was demand for shares above $38 apiece, but the group settled on $38 in the end. We also have exclusive new details on questions Morgan Stanley is facing about the decision to boost the size of Facebook's offering just days ahead of the IPO. Our senior West Coast correspondent John Ehrlichman uncovered this part of the story. John, what do you know?
Well, Emily, obviously Facebook's stock performance has left people wondering what happened and what was behind that late decision to boost the size of the IPO. Here's more now on the view that a key player in the deal shared in at least one private conversation.
We have a trade, $42. It just opened at $42. There we go.
From the confusing start,
we have seen this stock steadily decline. We are now trading at the IPO price.
To the swift sell-off that followed. Facebook's IPO has been anything but smooth.
I think it's clearly a failure because so many elements of the market dropped the ball.
Some of the blame has been directed at lead bank Morgan Stanley. Bloomberg West has learned a key banker involved in the deal, Paul Chamberlain, has been privately asked by at least one business contact about the decision to boost the size of the deal just days before the IPO. According to a source who spoke with Morgan Stanley's Chamberlain since the sell-off, the firm was proud of where it had priced the IPO. It viewed the offering as its pièce de résistance after an impressive run that saw Morgan lead the initial public offerings of LinkedIn, Groupon, and Zynga. On May 16th, 2 days before the offering, Facebook announced it was selling 25% more stock, a total sale of 421 million shares, meaning new investors would need to buy a whopping $16 billion worth of Facebook. Early investors like Goldman Sachs, Tiger Global Management, and Peter Thiel, a Facebook director, sold more than double what they initially planned to sell. Excel Partners, Greylock Partners, and DST Global also increased their sales.
Keeping the share size at the original size, I got to believe that deal would have priced and traded a lot better than what they ended up doing.
Given the ultimate size of the Facebook deal, a source says Morgan Stanley anticipated a modest 5% pop in the stock at the start of trading, which was seen for about 15 minutes.
So, John, obviously so many people have been surprised by the performance of this IPO, but is the takeaway now the signs did point to strong demand?
Well, look, that's what we know is that heading into this deal, the IPO day, all signs pointed to an oversubscribed offering, more demand than supply. But the takeaway now is that there are people on both Wall Street and in Silicon Valley who are asking these questions to the people involved about what the demand really was like and why ultimately that decision to boost the IPO size by 25% was made.
Interesting, John. The details keep on trickling out. Thank you. Now, for more on what we have learned from Facebook's IPO pricing conference call, let's bring in Bloomberg News reporter Doug McMillan, who helped break this story. He joins us live via Skype from Palo Alto. So, Doug, tell us exactly why this particular meeting was so important and And if it was so important, why wasn't Mark Zuckerberg there?
So the pricing of this offering is one of the most scrutinized bits of information over the past week. You know, $38, was that the right price? Was it too high? So we're getting a lot of details about when that price was set that is pretty telling. So Mark Zuckerberg was not present. You know, this is the person who, again, controls over 57% of voting in the company. To have his voice out of the room is pretty significant. You know, he was sort of represented by the CFO of Facebook, David Ebersman. Also present, as you mentioned, was James Gorman, the CEO of Morgan Stanley, which, you know, this is not typical for a CEO of a bank and of an underwriter to be present in such a meeting. So Morgan Stanley had a big presence in the room.
So what prices were discussed and who wanted to raise the price above $38 a share?
So like you said before, the goal was to get a small pop, less than 10%. You know, that's a little bit different than what we saw with LinkedIn and some of the other IPOs in the past where there's a big one-day gain. They wanted a small pop, so they wanted to settle on a price that would do that. You know, they ended up at 38. Before they ended up at 38, they were talking about as high as 41. JP Morgan representatives in the room, we found out, were pushing for a higher than 38, and Goldman Sachs representatives in the room were pushing for lower than 38. So ultimately, they ended up at 38.
Now, Doug, there's been a lot of finger pointing going on with this story. How do we know that all of this information is accurate? It's not, you know, someone trying to sell someone else out now that it has gone wrong in the aftermath?
It's hard to get the details. That's why we're, you know, being patient with the reporting. We're trying to, you know, wade through the he said, she said on this one.
So, Doug, let's talk a little bit about the retail investors here. You also wrote a story about Main Street losing $600-some million on this deal, talking to investors who bet their retirement savings on Facebook.
Well, Facebook is a popular brand, and we knew that going into this IPO, it would be popular and attract a retail investor that, you know, has little to no experience buying stocks. You know, we talked to a lot of people who, you know, bought about 100 shares, and it was, you know, their first or one of their first experiences buying stocks, and a lot of them are down money. You know, a lot of them are down several $1,000s, and that's significant to a lot of these people who had no experience trading stocks. Ultimately, the float ended up being, for retail investors, the allocation ended up being 25%. And so that's a significant hit. So over $600 million in losses for these retail investors on Facebook.
Well, the stock has regained 2 days in a row. We'll see if that continues. Doug McMillan in Palo Alto, thanks so much. We'll be back with you later in the program. So was Facebook's IPO a total flop or not? Not, according to my next guest. Glenn Solomon, a partner at GGV Capital, says that while the stock is down, the IPO is not a failure. Also with us is the great editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. So, Glenn, why wasn't it a failure?
Well, Emily, I think you need to look at two perspectives here. One is the company itself. Facebook is a once-in-a-generation kind of business. Look at the growth this company sustained over the last couple of years. They've gone global. They have over 900 million, pushing 1 billion users now, 1 in 7 of the world's population closing in on, and really establishing a big footprint in mobile. So company is a very exciting company. When you look at the deal, a deal of very large size, 16 billion was raised. So from that perspective, it was mission accomplished. The big issue here, as I see it, was a 100-year flood event that occurred at NASDAQ. The NASDAQ systems effectively failed. And you know, markets, in particular IPOs, are very tenuous balances between greed and fear. That's how these things work. And what you had was a period of uncertainty. People didn't know if their trades were confirmed. And then there began to be a steady flow of cancellations that people hear about. When you have that kind of uncertainty, fear arises, and that greed and fear balance ended up problematic. All that being said, still a volume-weighted average price on day one of over $40 a share relative to the pricing of the IPO at 38, with $20 billion raised. That's a pretty good result for the investment banks.
So clearly there were issues with the NASDAQ, but it's been 4 more days now. I mean, hasn't there been enough time for those issues to work themselves out? I mean, Corey, I was watching the stock trade today and yesterday, very end of the session, and you saw it spike at the very end and close far above the average price that it traded at all day. I mean, is that the bankers trying to push the price back up?
We'll never know who the buyer was today in the last 5 minutes of trading, but there clearly was an effort to get the stock higher. I've seen this with small stocks. I've seen this with crummy companies, the kind that I used to be involved in when I was an investor, hopefully on the short side. But you would see this kind of, I'm not going to call it market manipulation, but you would see this really unusual trading in the final moments of a trade. Usually you'd see this stuff at the end of a quarter. Again, it's not kosher, but you'd see stocks marked up at the end of a quarter when someone's trying to change their results. In this case, all eyes are on Morgan Stanley right now. And Morgan Stanley isn't just doing this, let me rephrase it. Morgan Stanley isn't just involved in supporting the stock for the benefit of Facebook or to look good in this deal. They're doing this so they get future investment banking deals. So that the venture capitalists and other companies who are trying to pick an investment bank say those guys at Morgan Stanley took it on the chin for Facebook. They're going to do the same for us, so that's a bank I want to bank with.
Glenn, you really emphasize the fundamentals of Facebook. And what's interesting is that Facebook and other deals that we've seen like Zynga and Groupon had wild enthusiasm from Silicon Valley, from venture capitalists who were falling all over themselves to get into these deals. But once they went into the public markets, there was a very different reaction. Why such a difference between Silicon Valley and Wall Street?
Great question. I spent the first couple of years of my career on Wall Street. I've been in Silicon Valley now in venture capital for 15 years. And I can tell you there is a big mismatch between how Silicon Valley looks at companies and how Wall Street tends to look at companies. The things they care about are very different. Sometimes that ends up in price dislocation. You've seen that with Zynga. You've seen that with Groupon. And perhaps you're seeing a little bit of that with Facebook now.
Corey, you're nodding.
Well, this is my Bloomberg West theme, right? Which is that we look at companies and we look at businesses and how businesses work. I think Wall Street looks at them as vehicles. And Silicon Valley uses Wall Street as a source of capital, as a source of liquidity. But at the end of the day, when Wall Street looks at it as a stock chart with something bouncing around, they don't care if you're selling eyeballs on Facebook or if you're selling widgets or software or oil and gas. It's just a chart. I think it's a big difference.
And clearly the insiders, the venture capitalists, the companies made a lot of money on this deal. But the question is, about mobile monetization, about Facebook's ability to diversify revenue streams. Can they do that?
Well, I think Facebook, as I mentioned earlier, is a remarkable business. The number of people that they touch, the amount of engagement that's there, it's really a once-in-a-lifetime kind of company. Now, they've got very big markets they're going after. Those markets take a while to develop. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see ups and downs in the growth of revenue and profit at the company over time. But I think when you take a long-term view, you're going to see a very big business over time. The real question becomes, how do you value that? And what does Wall Street think versus what does Sand Hill Road think? In Silicon Valley, we get very focused on growth. There's almost no price too high for high-growth companies. On Wall Street, I think Wall Street cares a lot about growth, but they expect growth to taper over time. There's only so much Wall Street will pay for growth. Wall Street cares a lot about profits. Profits, we're not so used to thinking about profits out here in Silicon Valley.
And Wall Street seems to think a lot of optimism was already priced into the deal as it was. Glenn Solomon of GGV Capital and Corey, thanks so much. Coming up, internet payment service PayPal is moving beyond the web to grab a share of the offline retail market. Find out why when we sit down with PayPal President David Marcus. That is next on Bloomberg West. Welcome back. I'm Emily Chang. Internet payment service PayPal is looking to grow beyond the internet and grab a share of the offline payment market, which is still far bigger than the online market. Today, the company announced a partnership with point-of-sale terminal manufacturers Verifone and Equinix, along with 15 national retailers that will begin offering PayPal as a payment option at the register. Joining us now to discuss is PayPal President David Marcus. He joins us now live from San Jose. So, David, welcome back to the show. First question, how do you plan to market this to consumers and educate consumers about this option?
Well, first things first. Today we've announced 15 more retailers, in addition with Home Depot and great brands like Abercrombie, Jamba Juice, Office Depot, Foot Locker. And so the first thing is for us to roll out our payment solution to all of these retail locations across the country. And then when we have a good penetration, we'll start marketing to our consumers, to our 110 million users, more aggressively. The one thing I want to stress as well is that not only did we announce large retailers today, but we also announced partnerships with mid-market point-of-sale systems like Earply, Vend, and others that will enable us to reach the mid-market of the SMBs with our check-in to pay experience, which is really the best shopping experience you can get. And that's very exciting too, because it complements the solution we launched with PayPal here for small merchants and the large merchants as well.
Right, so you've got the hardware, the software, and the retailers involved. Now, what makes you think that your efforts will come off better than Google Wallet, for example, which hasn't taken off, and the upcoming ISIS effort?
Well, I mean, the first thing that, where we have a huge advantage is we have 110 million active users around the world. And, a lot of them use their mobile phones all the time, and the PayPal app is being used by over 17 million people and growing very, very fast. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have millions and millions of merchants that accept PayPal and where we control the whole user experience. So that enables us to innovate at scale on both ends of the spectrum.
How much money do you expect PayPal will spend on this offline effort? ISIS is spending more than $100 million and Google far more than that.
Well, again, we don't have to acquire users. We already have a lot of users, 110 million of them. So we won't have to spend a lot of money to acquire new users to sign up for PayPal because they're already here. So we're going to be focusing on bringing really, really awesome user experiences for consumers and merchants alike. And then, we're going to help those merchants, those retailers, compete in a new normal for retail and compete with online retailers with better tools. And we think the adoption will come through great user experience and added functionality and tools for merchants.
Now, David, I do have to ask you a question about your former boss, Scott Thompson. We all know and we've all seen what happened to him. How does eBay and does PayPal reconcile the fact that he was working there for a very long time, even as CEO, with this computer science degree on his resume that he didn't in fact have?
Well, I don't want to comment on that. I wish Scott all the best. He now can focus on something that I think is more important than all of these things and rumors, which is his health. And I really wish him the best because, I think he did a phenomenal job at PayPal for 4 years. So wishing him all the best in him recovering.
Has any of this and his legacy at PayPal had any impact on your ability to work at the company or PayPal in general, given that he was with you guys for such a long time?
Well, I mean, first of all, he's the one who, went forward with the acquisition of Zong last summer. So that definitely helped because that's how I joined the company. And, the strategy that the whole team set and put together around going offline is something that started over a year ago that I'm now continuing and pursuing. So, the rails were set. Now it's all about execution and about bringing those user experiences to bear.
PayPal President David Marcus, thanks so much for joining us and sharing the details of these new partnerships. Good luck.
Thanks.
Coming up, an SAP executive has been arrested for turning a profit on stolen Legos. Yes, you heard that right. I said Legos. We have all the details next. This is Bloomberg West. I'm Emily Chang. It is time now for our 3 for 3 segment, 3 people, 3 stories, and usually about 3 minutes. Corey and John are here as well. First story of the day, Yahoo launching a browser, Yahoo Access. My question is, why now?
Look, 2 browsers in stories in a week. I mean, I remember Mark Andreessen saying, I think it was in our very first show, Mark Andreessen saying that the browser business was given up for dead, and there's a lot of innovation yet to happen there. And while we've seen Chrome take over as the #1 browser of Explorer on a steady slide down, there's probably room for innovation there.
I think the why now is probably because this stuff takes a long time to conceptualize and then build. So even though they've got a new CEO who's the media guy, it just so happened this was in the pipeline, and he can't say, actually, no, we're not going to launch it. But it does raise the question of, where the marketing spend's going to be, because we're all creatures of habit, right? It could be a great product, but are they going to get the word out about it, and is the push going to be there?
Well, we've often discussed this question: is Yahoo a technology company or a media company? What does this indicate about what they think the answer is, and are they even trying to answer that question?
Well, in so many products, too. I mean, this is a business that has acquired so many businesses, and they've got so many products. This is yet another one.
Second story, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, giving up $75 million. What a generous guy.
Well, first you say you're going to use that $100 billion towards goodies like dividends, but of course then ultimately a lot of employees could end up with a lot of that money. I'll let Corey talk a little bit about how restricted stock units work, but basically Tim Cook has a lot of them, and the company's decided they're going to give a dividend on that. As a result, he could have been getting $75 million, which he says, I'll say, no, I won't take.
Well, one of the interesting things is the employees are getting these restricted stock units, and some employees will be given cash dividends as their shares vest. Some others will actually, they're going to use it to reduce the tax bill for exercising their stock options. So Apple is really considered this, thought about this. I haven't seen this before where a company is sort of smart enough to think about the tax implications, with the exception, of course, of Facebook.
Now, this is all very interesting, but my favorite story of the day is this Lego story headline: Silicon Valley executive charged in elaborate Lego scheme. So this guy is a VP at, I shouldn't be laughing, but he's a VP at SAP, Thomas Langenbach, was putting fake barcodes on Lego boxes at Target, buying them more cheaply, then selling them for a profit on eBay.
There he is.
Like hundreds of them, if not thousands.
He made, correct me if I'm wrong, so he made $30,000 or something on this. So he moved...
That's a lot of Lego.
But he moved 2,100 Lego units, so he was like $14 per. Like, that is a dedicated barcode changer if you're getting $14 a pop.
Why Legos?
I don't know.
There's so much junk at Target.
Did they see him at Legoland, like scoping the place out?
Exactly.
SAP has had no comment, but he's apparently worked for the company since 1988, and he is still an employee, but he has been charged with 4 counts of...
Maybe he can build like a little Lego prison to be in, with Lego bars and on the windows.
I need a Lego bat.
That definitely was
story of the day.
The talker of the day.
Yeah,
the talker of the day.
That'll be the next thing they'll make with Legos. Maybe you can make the Lego barcodes for the Lego prison tats.
Well, it definitely changes the subject from SAP going out and doing another big deal.
Right.
And I'm sure Larry Ellison will keep this one in his back pocket for a rainy day.
The last thing they want to get publicity about. Okay, thanks, guys. Coming up, while Wall Street was glued to Facebook's stock price after the IPO, Facebook was busy buying yet another company, this time a gift-giving startup called Karma. How could it mean a new revenue stream for the social network? That story is coming up. You are watching Bloomberg West, where we focus on technology and the future of business. I'm Emily Chang with your Bloomberg top headlines. Warren Buffett says that Berkshire Hathaway is likely to buy more newspapers in the coming years. In a letter to editors of the 26 current Berkshire papers, Buffett writes that he believes free news is unsustainable. Berkshire Hathaway recently announced a deal to buy 63 newspapers from Media General for $142 million. That deal is expected to close next month. Sony says it will pay for the 3D glasses given out at theaters for the upcoming film Men in Black 3. Sony and the major movie theater chains had fought for months over who was going to foot the bill. But with the opening tomorrow, Sony says it'll pay this time, but warns it will not pay indefinitely. Sony has another big 3D movie, The Amazing Spider-Man, being released in July. And Facebook has released a new camera app for the iPhone. Facebook Camera allows you to take a picture with your smartphone and then crop it and post it on Facebook. The app is similar to Instagram, the app that Facebook is currently buying, but Instagram employees did not have input on this. No word yet on when the app will be available for Android. Turning now to today's biggest tech movers of the day. F5 shares closed down the most in 9 months today. To understand why, let's check back in with our senior West Coast correspondent, John Ehrlichman.
You know, Emily, this is part of a trend story. There are some growing concerns about the outlook from F5 networks, in part because of what we've been hearing from some other companies. Dell, remember they reported a weak outlook. Cisco, NetApp, all these companies raising some concerns for investors now in F5 networks. And this is a company that reported its results back in April, and the street response was favorable. Now some people wondering if they're going to be going along the same lines of some of the other players. Another stock that was moving lower today, EMC, huge player in storage. It's EMC World Week in Las Vegas. Years ago, they made a very good bet on VMware, and yet there was an analyst concern today about that VMware business, the virtualization software business, on whether or not they're going to lose some business after huge growth to some other players like Microsoft, and that hit EMC. And finally, also another down day, Research in Motion. Late yesterday, their global sales chief resigned, or at least we were informed that the global head of sales resigned, as if RIM didn't have enough woes to deal with right now. By the way, a former RIM analyst, formerly of RBC Capital Markets, Michael Ramsky, was on Bloomberg this morning, and he suggested maybe Facebook should go out and buy Research in Motion. A sign of the times, especially a sign of the market caps out there. Emily?
Now that would be news, John. Thanks.
No kidding.
Amid the flurry of excitement and confusion during the day, Facebook went public. The social network also announced its purchase of Karma Science, a gift-giving application. Let's check back in with Corey for more on why. Corey?
Yeah, why? Why did Facebook peg Karma as their next big acquisition after Instagram and do the deal when they were probably busy doing some other things like this IPO thing we may have mentioned earlier? Doug McMillan writes about this in the latest issue of Bloomberg Business Week. He's back with us via Skype from downtown, beautiful downtown Palo Alto, California. Doug, this is an interesting acquisition by these guys. Skype's just got off the ground, just launched, what, a few months ago?
Yeah, Karma just launched its app in February, and, an $80 million deal for, Facebook is known for acqui-hires, paying a little bit of money to basically hire some smart engineers. I'm being told that this is not the case. They want Karma, they want this technology, and more importantly, they want to get into this business of online commerce.
Yeah, it is interesting that this is not the acquisition of people, but a business change, because, what does this do? I mean, does this put Facebook in there with the business of being an online retailer, being like an eBay or an Amazon or something?
Well, so Facebook has tried to enter this category of social commerce, kind of combining e-commerce with social networking for a while. It's sort of been lackluster. It hasn't really taken hold. I think that they're making an offensive play and a bet that gifting, kind of the, recognizing that I can buy a bottle of chocolate, a bottle of champagne, or a box of chocolates for my friend on their birthday and fuel that through Facebook might be a good entry point for them to build an online commerce business and expand on that. And, as the, criticism of advertising revenue growth on Facebook is piling on, this might be a good answer to that skepticism about Facebook's growth.
Yeah, no, it really is. It is a clever idea for a business. I mean, maybe I jumped ahead by not really describing that. How do you describe this business?
So basically, Karma is a mobile app, and it scans through your Facebook friends to learn where their birthdays are, when they graduated, if they're feeling sad. It basically reads that from their Facebook feed, and then presents you ideas, recommendations for, hey, do you want to buy a Bluetooth speaker for your friend who just graduated college? So it does all this kind of in a seamless way, and it's a really slick designed app. So Facebook is going to keep Karma operating, and they're going to, more importantly, be in this business of online commerce.
Or about this business of online commerce. There are some other startups in this same area trying to do the same kind of thing. I mean, what do they say about this acquisition?
So it's two things. It's sort of a stamp of approval. It's a sign that, they're on to something. There's companies called Wantful. There's another company called Wrap, and these are kind of up-and-coming, young, but, backed by smart venture capitalists who say this is a next big thing. But there's a little bit of concern at the same time that Facebook could edge them out. Now Facebook, which owns, this platform of 900 million people, if it wants to get into this online commerce business and shove everyone out, it's very, the path is open for them to do that.
That would not be good karma. Doug McMillan, thank you very much. Interesting story. All right, Emily?
Thanks, Corey. Streaming online video from Netflix takes up a ton of network bandwidth, but a new report says Netflix internet traffic may have reached its peak. So what does that mean for Netflix's competitors? That story after the break. Welcome back. I'm Emily Chang. Major TV networks are giving little watch shows a new lease on life by moving them to Friday nights. That's one of the lowest rated time slots of the week, but the idea is to use the power of the DVR to give the shows a boost. Bloomberg's Gigi Stone is in New York with that story. So Gigi, how would that work?
Well, Emily, you know, the jargon in the TV industry used to be about promoting must-see Thursdays. Now the new phenomenon is DVR Fridays. The networks just announced their new fall seasons. They all talked about moving established shows to Friday nights. It's a night traditionally seen as a graveyard pretty much for TV shows, but it will soon be home to the Fox show Touch, NBC's Community, as well as ABC's Last Man Standing. Now, the reason the networks are doing this is to take advantage of DVR viewing. They only get paid for commercials that are viewed on DVRs within 3 days of the air date. So the idea with the schedule shift is that viewers have all weekend to catch up on their recorded shows. It provides networks with a ratings boost, and it improves revenue because ad dollars still count. Now, these aren't exactly the highest rated shows they're moving, but the networks are hoping to give them a bit of a second chance with viewers hopefully watching them on their DVRs, Emily.
And the networks here, are they responding to the DVR, you know, threatening their business?
Right, pretty much, because a lot of people watching shows on their DVRs tend to skip over all the commercials, which, of course, pay for the shows in the first place. In fact, Dish Network just upped the ante this month, really angering the networks. It started offering a feature you may have heard of called Auto Hop, which automatically skips commercials in any show its subscribers have recorded. You don't even have to fast forward. And Fox Broadcasting, in fact, just became the first TV network to sue Dish over this commercial skipping feature, which is so controversial. Dish, meanwhile, filed its own lawsuit. It asked the federal judge to declare that Auto Hop violates copyright laws, and Dish sued Fox, CBS, ABC, and NBC. So it's getting into a pretty heated battle, Emily.
And yet the shows that they're moving to Fridays actually aren't the highest rated shows, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're not the highest rated shows, but you know, so many people watch shows on their DVRs now. DVR viewing has actually quadrupled over the past 5 years, according to Horizon Media. So they're hoping that they might be able to get a little revenue on the tail end here, Emily.
All right, thanks for that. Gigi Stone in New York. Now, from DVRs to online streaming, a new report shows internet traffic related to Netflix may have hit its peak, and that could be a very good thing for competing services. For that story, we turn back to our John Ehrlichman. John?
Yeah, Emily, usually when we talk about the outlook for a company like Netflix, we'll speak to an analyst, but Sandvine, a company which keeps an eye on what's happening on networks, has a great read on Netflix demand. Don Bowman is the Chief Technology Officer and the co-founder of Sandvine. He joins us now from Toronto. So, Don, give us the dirt. What are you seeing about traffic for Netflix?
Well, what we're seeing is on the mobile network, there's not a lot of use of Netflix today, so it's still primarily a fixed phenomena. Netflix is the largest single driver of bandwidth at peak time. Peak time bandwidth is the cost structure of fixed networks, and today Netflix is using about 35% of the downstream. What we're expecting is that Netflix has actually hit its peak in terms of bandwidth. This is not to say that there's not going to be more people using Netflix or more videos watched by those users, but in fact what it means is that it's no longer growing more rapidly in bandwidth than other services. Some of those other services are other video services. HBO Go, Amazon Prime are examples, but others are non-video services like Dropbox, Apple's cloud service, and so on. Those are starting to grow more rapidly, which means that we think that we've reached the peak Netflix bandwidth.
All right, so a little more perspective. So, I mean, 35% is a monster number. Netflix is one of the monsters. YouTube has been one of the monsters. And you highlighted Hulu, Amazon. I mean, what's the percentage comparison?
Well, really, it's currently about YouTube versus Netflix, and they're entirely different use cases. They're not really competitive. So with a YouTube video, most people are watching a median of about 3 minutes long. So it's a clip service, and it's a very large number of people. More than 90% of the internet population uses YouTube 1 or more times per month. Whereas when you talk about Netflix, the median usage of a video is about 41 minutes. So people are watching television shows and movies, and it's a much smaller percentage that are watching it, but they're watching more bandwidth. The two are using roughly the same bandwidth. On a global basis, YouTube is the clear leader because it exists in every single market. And on the mobile device, YouTube is the uncontested leader at around 26% of the downstream. But on the fixed network today, really it's coming down to those two.
And it's not just about the traffic, it's about when the traffic is heaviest. We can show a chart, actually, that shows when that peak in the usage of Netflix occurs over the course of a day between, 12 p.m. and midnight. And look at that. So once you get to around 10 o'clock, I mean, Gigi Stone was just talking about when shows are doing well. I would imagine if you're ABC or CBS or NBC, you've got to think about when people are choosing Netflix over network television.
People want to be entertained when they want to be entertained. It allows them to choose their own peak time, their own prime time. So prime time used to be chosen by the networks, now it's chosen by people. That's why it's broadening out a little bit, because it's all on demand. On demand is really in demand. It's the peak that causes the cost structure of fixed networks today. You build a network based on its peak capacity, not its average capacity, which means those networks are actually getting less efficient. All of that off-peak bandwidth is actually wastage. There's a link been paid for, which nobody's using.
Hey, Don, very quickly before we go, in 10 seconds, is the bottom line on the phone story, which you talked a little bit about, that a lot of people aren't watching movies and television shows on their phones just yet?
Well, the interesting thing on the phones, for the first time ever in the United States, 50% of the bandwidth goes to real-time entertainment. It's all smartphone-driven. Tablets and so on are mostly an in-home phenomena. The really interesting thing there in the real-time entertainment was Pandora. We saw that at 6% of the bandwidth, which means people are leaving multi-hours on. They're replacing essentially XM radio. The rest of it is all YouTube, which means people are watching clips. We think that's going to lead to a lot of things like Netflix in the future. People are getting comfortable leaving the phone on for a long time, comfortable with viewing clips. The next thing we think will be feature-length stuff over the mobile network.
There you go. Don, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Don Bowman of Sandvine. Leave the Pandora on and walk away. Emily, back to you.
Thanks, John. One of the biggest guessing games in Silicon Valley, which new startup will be the next Facebook? We try to answer that question next. This is Bloomberg West. I'm Emily Chang. A key Senate lawmaker is voicing his concerns about the Facebook IPO and the prospects for a congressional hearing. Our chief Washington correspondent, Peter Cook, just got off the phone with a member of the Senate Banking Committee. He is in D.C. now with the latest. Peter, what can you tell us?
Well, Emily, I spoke just a short time ago with Senator Jack Reed. He's a Democrat from Rhode Island. More importantly, he's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets. This is the subcommittee that has jurisdiction over the SEC, jurisdiction over the issue of IPOs, and the subcommittee most likely to have any sort of hearing, if there is one, into Facebook. I spoke with him a little while ago, and he, like other lawmakers, very concerned about this situation, particularly because he's heard from constituents back in his home state who may have been affected here, may have feel like they were treated unfairly. Among the things he said that they're going to try and take a look at as they do a review right now of the IPO, specifically the issue of whether or not there was disclosure to these institutional investors, to the underwriters, that wasn't shared with average retail investors, and whether indeed that's even a violation. He says to me, rules might have been appropriate then, referring to a few years ago, in terms of being able to inform large institutional clients about the status of the company. Now, with lots of retail investors, we have to be much more conscious. In fact, our duty is probably to protect them more so than anyone else. Really stressed to me the idea of fairness here, and that's his big concern. As to the question of will they have a hearing, he was non-committal on that at this point. He says he's going to work with the full committee chairman, Tim Johnson. He did say this: I think the first step is what we're doing now to find out what's going on. Before we schedule a hearing, we want to get as much information as possible. If we do have a hearing, we want it to be useful. We don't just want it to be an event. And as you know, Emily, these things can become events. And if you have a Facebook hearing, it would be an event here. The sense here in Washington is that we're likely to have a hearing, but certainly nothing announced at this time.
Indeed. Peter Cook, thanks so much. You will keep us updated on that story. Now, since Facebook's IPO, one of the biggest questions on investors' minds is what will be the next big thing? No one wants to miss out on that opportunity, but what will it be? LinkedIn posed this exact question to its users. What company will be as successful as Facebook? The answer, Pinterest, came in first with 44% of votes. Square came in second with 27%. Joining us now to discuss these results is Chip Cutter, editor of LinkedIn Today. He joins us now from New York. So, Chip, Pinterest seems to be getting all the love lately. Why do you think that is?
Right, absolutely. It's the darling of the social networking world right now. And I think a lot of people are just using the site because they're finding inspiration there. They're saying, I'm seeing these cool photos, these cool ideas, and I think that spans across both genders, both men and women.
Now, interesting quote from some of your users, from Ashley Smith. Trick question, Pinterest already is the next big thing. One of the things I thought was interesting, you found it was more popular among women than men, more popular among younger people as well.
Exactly, and that really fits. We know Pinterest gets most of its traffic from women, but we thought it was interesting that men were also voting for this, but also the younger people. So this really Pinterest kind of relates to what's going on in their lives. People who are planning their first wedding or furnishing their first house or apartment, they're going on Pinterest and finding lots of ideas from really popular boards around that. So it kind of makes sense that a younger demographic would be more into this.
Square, you found, however, was popular among older users, though I find 30 to 36-year-olds calling them older. I take a little bit of an issue with that, but we won't go there. What exactly is the appeal of Square?
Exactly. Well, people on LinkedIn were really commenting on Square's business model. You know, the site's Square is on track to have 5 billion in transactions this year. People are saying that it's really easy to understand how Square makes money. You know, it's changing mobile payments. It's making that really easy. And so people are big fans of Square, and they're also fans of their management, Jack Dorsey.
What sort of other answers did users come back with other than Pinterest and Square? What are people talking about out there?
Well, we thought it was interesting, too. We heard a number of people comment on Path, saying that they're having some social media fatigue. They like Path because it's a way to kind of limit who's in their social network. So, you know, a popular feature on Path is saying, what time do you wake up and what time do you go to bed in the morning? And so some people are saying, hey, we like that. We're only going to share that with only a small number of people that we wouldn't on bigger sites, but that's the appeal of it.
You know, and I heard Quora also has some fans out there as well.
Exactly. Quora, obviously a very cool site to go and ask questions and see what experts in the industry are answering. And I think the big question with that is, as it gets bigger, can it maintain its kind of cool appeal? Can it still have, can it still be the source where you find really just unique, kind of quirky questions and answers?
How about an answer to the question, can anything really be the next Facebook, rather than what will be the next Facebook?
Right. Well, we heard from one user who said, no, none of these sites can be the next Facebook. Facebook is the juggernaut, that it's going to be really hard for any site to replicate its success. And that maybe is the thought that maybe none of these sites are that different from Facebook to really take its place in the social media world.
Well, the story certainly has yet to be written. Chip Cutter of LinkedIn Today, thanks so much for joining us. Up next, stick around for our B West Bite, one number that reveals a whole lot. And now it's time for the B West Bite, where we focus on one number that tells a whole lot. What do we have on the agenda today?
The number is 32.48, or $32.48, and that is the, someone already mentioned in our show today, volume-weighted average price. That was the average price of Facebook trades today, not the $33 closing price.
Right, it closed at $33.03 or something. It was interesting because I was watching it for the last 20 minutes, and it just shot up from like $32.48 to above 33, rounding it out.
Yeah, and what's important as well about where people do the most buying of a stock is, of course, the first day, some people were buying at a higher level than where it closed, and certainly a lot higher than where it is now, and that gets us to all the blame game that continues for Facebook.
So I know we can't know for sure if this is the work of bankers trying to boost the price at the end of the session, but do we know how many more shares they actually have to work with to even do that?
We don't know. We'll never know. You know, I think it's interesting that we're sitting here in Bloomberg West talking about stocks and stock trading, but it is so important to so many companies in Silicon Valley. How are they going to get public? How are they going to get liquidity? How are they going to get more capital to make their businesses bigger and better?
And speaking of IPOs, somebody, John Ehrlichman, came across this song that somebody wrote about the Facebook IPO. Take a listen. Who is this guy?
He's the guy.
Dad, you're always embarrassing me, Dad. No, that's not my fault.
We're all Facebooking, you know? I guess if Bob Dylan was still inspired to write as he once was, maybe he'd be talking about how we're all Facebooking these days.
Sort of speaks to the wide consumer appeal of Facebook, as we were
Everybody
speaking
must
about
get Facebook.
earlier. Okay, thanks, guys. We will be back tomorrow.